Hello, I'm Carlo Rovelli, and this is my comment on Time and Pragmatism by Huw Price. Let me start by saying that I have always been a defender of the idea of the utility, the usefulness of the dialogue between physicists and philosophers. And for me, the case of Huw Price is exemplar. I'm a physicist engaged in conceptual questions in my discipline, and I've always found Huw to be an extraordinary source of insight, ideas, and inspiration. There is a contiguity between the questions that fundamental physics has led me into and the questions that Huw Price addresses. His book on the Arrow of Time has marked me strongly, including for the technical work of the quantum gravity that I've done, and his discussion on pragmatism is having quite an influence on my views and my work. And perhaps because of this continuous influence, I find myself quite naturally in line with what Huw writes in this paper. In fact, coming to a topic of Huw's papers, one of the two topics, time and pragmatism. On time, I've written a book, which is the order of time, and the main thesis of the book is precisely that we're not going to understand temporality unless we also focus on ourselves. Indeed, I am convinced that many of aspects of temporality are incomprehensible in terms of the world alone, while they become comprehensible only when we bring the specific perspective of ourselves, who are situated, and the specific features and modes of functioning of our brain, in particular, into the picture. And I am convinced that a common mistake we do, specifically about time, is to take things that pertain to us and project them down onto the world in a way of which we are not aware about. So there's clearly a lot of common in the way I see time and the way you see time, and what I want to explore in these remarks is the extent in which our views are the same or differ, if any. And I also want to add one potentially crucial element to use a story about the perspectival aspect of time. I have three remarks. Two of these are sort of discussed in my book, The Order of Time, and one relates to quite some work that I've done recently, very recently. A few papers I've done recently on this topic, and as you will see, these are directly engaged in what Huw is doing. Now, the first remark is this. I believe that many discussions about time actually are on different topics, one with respect to the other. This, in fact, is the other major thesis of my book. And the reason is that when we use the notion of time, we are not using something univocal. The notion of time is rich, diversified, and stratified, and used in different contexts. And notice that I'm starting here not sort of in tune with Huw's pragmatism. I'm not formulating this in terms of what time is, but I'm formulating the question in terms of what we do when we talk about time. Now, why stratified? Well, consider this. Most of the discussion about time in this paper by Huw regards the direction of time, directionality of time. And from within this discussion, the directionality appears to be a key aspect of time. But this is not always the case. And, just take any textbook on classical, any good textbook on classical mechanics, and what it says is that time is a crucial notion for doing mechanics, and within this context, time does not have a directionality. So in that context, directionality is not a feature of time. But next step, in that context, time is characterized by the fact, what we mean by time include the fact that is a very precise variable in terms of which everything else evolves and is singled out and is unique. So this is what we mean by time. But then we take a special relativity book and this is just denied. So again, there is a notion of time, but it doesn't have this feature. And I could go on. I mean, if you go to general relativity and if you go to quantum gravity, you're still talking about time, but you're talking about different notions of time because they lack some of the features of the properties that were considered defining even in other contexts. So I think this plurality of meanings of time, it has to be taken into account when we talk about time. Now, the point is that at each level, there is a lot of discussion, not just about the durationality of time. There's a lot of discussion in quantum gravity how to write meaningful theory without the preferred notion of time. There's a discussion in general relativity on which sense time is different from other variables and so on and so forth. And these are different questions, and the literature really tackles different sort of questions. In the equation of quantum gravity, which I work with, there's just no time variable at all. And yet, this is a little step ahead, yet I'm convinced that those equations in some sense account to the normal phenomenology of temporality in the sense of which the Maxwell equations account for chemistry underpin biology, including our experiential time. And to make the connection, we have to move through a number of steps, which include both the restriction to smaller domains, where what we call time acquires additional properties, so non-quantum, non-strong gravity, non-relativistic, macroscopic, and at each step some variables have specific properties that in the larger domain don't have, but also, and here I am entirely on Huw's side, we must be concerned of how a biological organism function, how in particular the brain works. It's epistemic, agential, situated viewpoint, and the specific concerns that a creature like us with memory, agency, desires and fears has. This is the main thesis of my book. So without this, I believe we're not understanding what goes on when we talk about time, including about the question, which I agree is a good question, which is not what time is, but rather what, or more precisely, how we came to think in temporal terms. What is the role that think in temporal terms plays for us? So my first remark is this: yes, to understand time, we need to look at us. But carefully, this is, in my opinion, in the context of of realizing that time is a stratified concept with various properties and levels. Each one of these, in a sense, require a different discussion. That's the first remark. My second remark, and here I'm not sure. I'm curious to hear what Huw thinks about that. Here I seem, but maybe not, to moving slightly away from Huw's perspective. In my third remark, I will get much closer back to him. So my second remark is that I found sometimes Huw slightly overplaying his hand. And I'm not sure whether I'm misunderstanding it or whether he does leave some ambiguity. Let me focus on the direction of time. So, as I said, I'm completely convinced that fundamental physics doesn't have any room for universal direction of time. There's no direction of time in fundamental physics. I do not need to be convinced about that. So the question is, where is direction of time coming from? What we mean when we talk about direction of time in a world that by itself doesn't know a direction of time. Now there are two answers that are suggested in use in your Price paper, in fact 3, but let me just mention 2. The first is simply, so it appears first in a footnote, but then more at the end, is that we happen to live in a situation, contingent, if you want, accidental, might not be general, where there is a gradient of entropy, right? And as you said, this doesn't imply that there's a universal duration of time. In fact, I believe that it doesn't at all. But this gradient of entropy that gives a direction underpins the existence of a direction, for instance, in all irreversible phenomena. The second answer is that we ourselves are strongly temporally oriented beings because of our agency and because of our memories. These are the 2 variants. I do think that the crucial one is agency, it's not memory. Memory is in a sense more responsible of the fixity of what we call the fixity of the past, where agency is deeply the root of what we call the openness of the future. And it's because of our perspectival orientation of agents that time has a direction for us. Now, these are 2 different answers. The second one brings back time to us in a much stronger sense than the first one. The first one just in the sense that we are located somewhere where there is a certain gradient of time. It's like, you're in the mountain, there's an up and down, and we call up the direction of the mountain, but it's not, maybe it's north if you're in northern Italy, it's south if you are in southern Germany, because the mountains are in one direction, in one place, and in the other direction, or the other place. So the directionality of time according to the first answer, just depend on where we're located. In the second case, depend on us in a much more heavy way, because it depends on our perspective of deliberating agents. I just want to emphasize that there are these 2 different senses in which our situation, our properties play a role in the direction of time. Now, which one do I think is the correct answer? Well, for me, pretty clearly, both. Both are correct answers to the question, where does the direction of time come from? They just address different aspects of the directionality of time. The first one is sufficient for underpinning, for explaining, in fact, the directionality of reversible phenomena, gas that expand. The second one, it's needed. The first one is absolutely not sufficient for by itself for allowing us to make sense of more complex aspect of what we call time, like the sense of flowing or the openness of the future, this kind of things. So they're both part of the story, but they're different manners in which ourselves come into giving time a direction. Now, similarly, I'm convinced, by what you say, but what you says, following Ramsey, in explaining difference between past and future as a manifestation of the epistemic perspective, the deliberating answer. Yes, I think this is the case. The future is a manifestation of the perspective of the deliberating answer, but this difference between the past and the future is just one, important to us, but one of the differences, plural, between past and the future. There are other differences where our deliberating role just plays no role. I guess what I'm arguing here is that, to use the phrase that you opened with, the trail of the human serpent over everything, it's good we recognize it, but I don't think we should reduce everything ourselves in too flat a way. It's more articulate the way in which our own being determines a lot of things that we read out from the world. It is at some point you uses the analogy up and down. I think it's a very good analogy, up and down, with respect to the direction of time. I do think it is so. Up and down is certainly not a fundamental property of space and time somewhere. It's just we understand it very well. It depends on the fact that we are on the shape of the Earth and gravity and so on. It does not depend on the fact that our head it's on the top and our feet are down. So there's a lot of the world related to this symmetry that are more weakly related to us. Now, let me come to causation. There are definitely features of causation that require the deliberation into the picture, and Huw brings Ramsay into the into the story. By the way, you allow me, if I may, to say there's not just Cambridge in the thinking world, there is something else. And since I'm an Italian, let me just mention that also De Finetti at that time that made quite interesting points, also in some sense of a more general ground of the nature of scientific thinking in connection to what Ramsay did. And of course, subjectivity, probability, and so on. I was mentioning causation. I found a discussion in the paper about dropping plates and messing the floor correct, but there's something missing here. I mean, it's not just the fact that we cannot enact the first sort of dropping plates with a second, messing the floor, that underpin causation here. I think there is more, and there is something we can use, we do use, we constantly use a notion of causation in contexts where there isn't any deliberation going on. I mean, we said that a certain star exploded because a certain thing fell on it. There's nobody deliberated there, nor we're really projecting deliberation there. I think it's something slightly different that is going there. One thing which definitely I think the relevance of the agent is it's essential to understand is the relevance of causation. The relevance. Because we can make a story. Another analogy that you use is the beauty of a baby. It's not too hard to find a number of characteristics of faces that mark the beauty of the cuteness of a baby. Okay, we can do that. We can tell a computer to recognize it, and it's cute babies. But what this completely misses to understand is why cuteness appears cute to us. I mean, why is relevant for us, babies being cute? For that, we have to resort to what it led us to pick up that particular structure as relevant. And I think for causation is exactly the main story. Causation is like the beauty of a baby, right? It is a structure which is out there. I mean, also sort of possible structure, but it is a structure that's particularly relevant for a deliberating agent. And to understand what is a deliberating agent, once again, we need to understand the full thermodynamics and more. And we don't understand what we call the openness of the future. There's beautiful work by Jananis Ismail on that, unless we refer specifically to the perspective of deliberating agency. So I'm saying that there is this complexity in my recent work, and just I want to close the second part. I have struggled to bring some clarity on the relation between the entropy gradient and memory, and more in general formation of traces, agency, and its openness to the future, and causation. And in particular, the alignment of the arrow of causation on the thermodynamical time. I think we have to figure out, to fully understand what these things are, both how the thermodynamical arrow permits these things to happen, or in the case of traces and memories, just is a clear reason for which they are so abundant around us. These in turns underpin the perspective of an agent, and therefore we can understand the full story. So in a sense, my observation goes in two directions here with respect to you. In the one direction, it fully supports Price deep perspectivalism. We don't understand the world unless we bring heavily us into the picture. On the other direction, it seemed to re-objectify what I'm saying, the temporal concept, a little bit more than what seemed to be out in you. Do we agree here? Maybe yes. Maybe we're completely agreeing. I'm just not sure. I want to bring this out. And let me say just make one more step here, which perhaps brings us, and that's a crucial step for me. We biological organisms, we're not things, right? We're phenomena. We're happenings. And we are irreversible phenomena. Specifically, phenomena that consist in the degradation of free energy, dissipation of energy into heat. That's what we are. Like we're a burning candle, complicated burning candle, right? So this is what is a living organism is. And in particular, animals like that have a brain. More than animals, I mean, organisms like animals have a brain, and the brain activity, it's a super dissipative phenomenon, right? When you think, your brain becomes hot. So it's a time-oriented phenomenon. So it exists because there's a gradient of entropy. So everything that the brain does, or produce, or generate, or whatever you want to put it, it is deeply directional itself. And it's precisely, I think, this intrinsic dynamical aspect of thinking that Huw stresses in his paper. Seems to me that is the reason of our so strong intuition about an orientation of the world. So the intuition about the time orientation of the world is really because we are directly, not because of deliberation, because we do think outside, because that's what we are. We think in time. There's no thinking out of time. Therefore, it's itself a result of the thermodynamical gradient. So I do believe that, as beautifully Huw puts at the end of his paper, concepts, terms, properties have the mark of the creatures, of the time-oriented creatures we have, precisely because that's what is thinking. But I think, on the one hand, this means that the trail of the serpent, it's all over, right? As this is where Huw is arriving at. So it's not just the directionality of time; it's everything that has the trail of the serpent. But I think we also struggle continuously to close the circle. To cite a beautiful expression by Abner Shimoni, namely to recognize that the trail of the human serpent over everything should not prevent, recognizing it, should not prevent this the same serpent that we are, to search to articulate a world view in which we understand how the serpents crawl all together through. And there is obviously circularity here, but this is good circularity, I think. This is a beautiful circularity. Part of the world we are, and this world we struggle to understand. This is how gropingly we get understanding. We serpents are much natural creatures like anything else, and the conceptualization of the world we must have include a story about what this very conceptualization can be or is. So this is my first observation. Was said perhaps not in a fully straight way, but I think we get you get the point. Just fully appreciate Price perspectivalism and pragmatism, but perhaps tempered it with a little bit more of naturalism in a large sense. And I'm not sure if we disagree or not. Now let me change topic completely and go to the third point, which will be shorter, which is the following. And to some sense, in a sense, it brings me back a lot toward you. So, if the directional of time is rooted in the entropy gradient, which I've been repeating over and over, what is the entropy gradient? Okay, what exactly is the entropy gradient? Now, an entropy gradient is something that has no meaning in a purely microscopic account of natural phenomena, because the notion of entropy cannot be defined. It has only meaning in a macroscopic account, which means macroscopic account means an account of phenomena that singles out some variables as macroscopic. So an entropy gradient is not a property of the phenomenon itself, but those variables, specifically of those variables. Good. Now, second point, the choice of these variables is not free. It's not that picking variables randomly makes any sense in the thermodynamic context. The relevant macroscopic variables of a system S, are determined by the way this system couples to another system. An observer, a machine, an apparatus, something that manipulates it, whatever you want. So, why? Because when two systems interact, typically the second system interacts with the first, not with all the variables of the first, which are a small subset of the variables of the first. Okay, we animals interact with the world not in terms of the zillions and zillions of variables of the world, but some variables of the world, many, but some. Okay, therefore, the interaction itself defines a macroscopic perspective, defines some macroscopic variables those systems interact with. And therefore, an entropy is defined, and an entropy is defined by the choice of it's defined physically, not falling from the blue sky, physically, but how two systems interact. So this means that entropy is not a property of a system by itself, but it's a property of the way a system couples with another system. And this raises a puzzle, right? When we say that the entropy of S was low in the past, necessarily we're talking the entropy in respect to something interact with S. Let me call it S prime. So when we say that the entropy of S with respect to S prime, our macroscopic description, was low in the past, are we talking about a property of S, or are we talking a property of S relative to S prime? Are we talking a property of S or a property of S and S prime together? Now, low entropy means special. Is S having low entropy in the past special in some sense, or special with respect to S prime? And the point here is that every baby is special for his mother, but no baby is special by itself in the way special with respect to his mother, of course. So careful, because being special is a relative notion for babies and for entropy equally. So now let's come to the fact that we live in an entropy gradient. This means that the entropy around us was low in the past. But is this a property of the world around us, or a property of the world together with the fact which we I don't mean we humans, I mean a subset of the universe, subset of the variables of the universe, which are the one in terms of which we exist as macroscopic beings, interact with the rest of the universe with a coarse graining such that in the past there was low entropy. So is it a property of the world, or is it a property of the system with respect to which, of the perspective on the system? And I have explored the possibility that the second perspective is a good one. A second way of thinking of the world is a good one. In a paper a few years ago, I keep coming back to this idea. I see the title was a question mark. Is past low entropy perspectival? I continuously come back to the suggestion. I see good reasons to question it. Could be wrong, but I also see good reason to take it seriously. I'm not going to delve into that at all here, but I want to mention here in this context here, because ultimately I suspect we might realize that the gradient of entropy itself is deeply perspectival, because entropy is a relative notion. So it depends on other systems. So I think that there is a possibility that we might all get convinced slowly that the entire direction of evolution of the world dictated by the growth of entropy could be deeply perspectival in this sense here, which means to talk about us not only about human beings, and here again is my enlarging the perspectivalism, not only specifically of human beings with our desire, brain, culture, or whatever, but also as part of the universe. So I close. Certainly, it seemed to me that the majestic dance of the cosmos given by entropy growth could be perspectival. Now, this seems a quite strong claim, but let's not forget that the most majestic spectacle we see on Earth, the daily rotation of the sky around us, is entirely perspectival, right? It's not the sky which is rotating, it's we are rotating, and with respect to us, we see it. But what I want to say is that let's not forget that it took millennia for humankind to figure this out. Thank you.